On my son's graduation day, I handed him an envelope with everything I had saved for 30 years. He looked at it, then looked at me, and said the only thing he wished was that someone else had been his father. He hugged his professor and walked away. But when he opened that envelope later that night, his whole world fell apart. Before we go on, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. Lo wen mei yuan. My son's voice carried across the kitchen like he was reading a number off a billboard. Flat. Impatient. Like I'd just told him I could offer him a used bicycle when he needed a sports car. I stood in the doorway of his apartment, still holding my cap in both hands the way I always do when I'm nervous. The place was nice, too nice for a 3-2 year old who'd been in graduate school for the last 4 years. Leather couch, bookshelves built into the walls, a coffee machine that probably cost more than my first truck. Dad, the reception alone is going to run $40,000. He didn't look up from his laptop. Professor Aldridge's daughter had her graduation party at the Belmont house. That's the standard now. I cleared my throat. I have $18,000. That's what I've managed to put aside. I can look into borrowing more. Maybe 18. He finally looked at me. Just looked. The way you look at a wrong answer on a test. I'm a doctoral candidate in economics, Dad. Do you understand what that means? My colleagues' parents are funding research trips, buying condos, and you're offering me $18,000 like that's something to be proud of. I wanted to tell him what $18,000 looked like from where I was standing. 41 years driving a delivery truck for Coastal Freight out of Savannah, Georgia. Bad knees, a bad back, a pension that covered the mortgage and the electric bill, and not much else after his mother's medical treatments ate through what we'd set aside. I wanted to say all of that, but his face wasn't open to it. You've had my whole life to figure something out, he said. And this is where we are. I don't know what I expected, honestly. He closed the laptop. I think it's better if you go, Dad. I need to focus. I drove home on I-16 with the windows down, because the air conditioning had been broken for 2 months, and I hadn't fixed it yet. The August heat came through the windows like a wall. I thought about his mother, Ruth, and what she used to say when he was small and stubborn. That boy is going to change the world, Walter. You just have to make sure he doesn't forget where he came from. She died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. She never got to see him finish his doctorate. At home, the house felt smaller than usual. It was the same house we'd brought my son home to from the hospital 32 years ago. Same porch, same oak tree in the front yard that was just a sapling back then. I sat in Ruth's chair by the window and looked at the photos on the bookshelf. My son at his high school graduation, grinning in his blue gown, his arm around my shoulders. At his undergraduate ceremony, shaking my hand with both of his, saying, Dad, none of this happens without you. I mean that. I wondered when that person had become the man I'd just left in that apartment. Ruth, I said to the empty room, what would you do right now? I walked to the kitchen table where I kept my financial papers in a folder. My pension statement. Social Security. The account where I'd been putting away $50 every month for the last decade, because 50 was what I could manage. $18,000. Built dollar by dollar, trip by trip, year by year. But maybe I picked up my phone and called First Southern Bank. I'd had an account there since 1987. The loan officer's name was Carol. She had a patient voice, the kind that's learned rather than natural. Mr. Brannick, she said after pulling up my file, you're looking at a significant commitment for someone on a fixed income. The maximum we could responsibly offer would be $35,000, but the interest rate would be 11% annually, given your age and income profile. I did the math while she talked. My monthly payment would be more than half my pension. My son is finishing his doctorate, I told her. He's worked his whole life for this. She processed the paperwork without trying to talk me out of it further. I signed where she told me to sign. When I walked out of that bank, the cashier's check in my jacket pocket felt like proof of something, like evidence that an old truck driver from Savannah could still solve an impossible problem through sheer stubbornness. I drove to my son's apartment the next morning, feeling something close to hope. He opened the door in his robe, coffee in hand, visibly surprised. Dad, what are you doing here? I pulled the envelope from my jacket. I got a loan. There's $53,000 here, between the bank and my savings. More than you asked for. He stared at the envelope. Something moved across his face. Not gratitude. Not exactly. Something more complicated. He took a slow breath. Dad. He set his coffee down. Professor Aldridge already offered to fund the reception. Through the department. It's already handled. I stood there with my arms still extended. He offered yesterday evening. My son continued. His voice gentle now in a way that was somehow worse than the coldness from before. After we spoke, I mentioned I was dealing with some family stuff, and he said the department wanted to celebrate my completion properly. He has connections. The Hendricks Room at the Savannah Convention Center. It's not something you could have. He stopped himself. Not something I could have what? I said. It wasn't really a question. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. It's just a different level, Dad. You understand. I put the envelope back in my jacket. He watched me do it. I'll tell them to keep it modest, he said. You can still come. Of course you can come. I nodded. Of course. I sat in my truck in his parking lot for a long time after that. The engine was off. The heat built slowly. 41 years of early mornings and highway miles and coming home with my back so stiff, I had to grip the door frame to pull myself out of the cab. A different level. He'd said it like it was obvious, like the distance between his world and mine was just geography. I drove past the bank on the way home, went inside, asked Carol to cancel the loan. The early cancellation penalty was $420. I paid it without flinching. It felt appropriate somehow. The cost of learning something true. At home, I made coffee and sat with Ruth's old cardigan draped over the back of her chair. And I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be for whatever time I had left. The graduation invitation sat on the kitchen counter. Ivory paper, raised gold lettering. The honor of your presence is requested. Saturday, 11 o'clock, the Savannah Civic Center Auditorium. I'd already bought a new shirt. The weeks between that conversation and the ceremony were quiet in a way I wasn't used to. My son called twice. Once to remind me about parking near the Civic Center. Once to ask if I'd gotten his voicemail. I hadn't checked it. Both calls lasted under 4 minutes. He didn't call to talk. He called to manage. I started noticing the pattern clearly only once I was looking for it. The department dinner I wasn't told about until it was over. The faculty reception where he mentioned I probably wouldn't enjoy it, that it was mostly academic shop talk. The article published in an economics journal I found out from a neighbor who'd read about it online. Are you coming to the pre-graduation brunch? I asked him once on the phone. Oh, that's just for the doctoral candidates and their advisors, he said. Very small thing. You'd be bored, honestly. 3 days before the ceremony, my neighbor Pauline stopped me on the porch. She'd known my son since he was learning to ride a bike in this driveway. Walter, she said, holding her phone toward me. It's your boy. On the department website. There was a photo. My son at a dinner table laughing, in a restaurant I didn't recognize. The caption read, Celebration Dinner for Doctoral Candidates. Hosted by Department Chair Professor Gerald Aldridge. The date was 2 Saturdays ago. The same Saturday I'd called and he said he was home grading papers. I looked at the photo for a long time. I went inside and found the box I'd kept in the back of the bedroom closet for 32 years. Ruth and I had agreed, when he was small, that we'd tell him when he was ready. We'd tried twice, and both times something interrupted us. Once when his grandfather died, and the timing felt wrong. Once when he was 19 and going through a difficult stretch, and we didn't want to add weight to an already heavy year. Then Ruth got sick, and after she was gone, I couldn't find a way to bring it up that didn't feel like I was doing it alone. Without her. The box held a folder. Inside the folder were documents from the Georgia Division of Family and Child Services. A letter from the adoption agency. A single photograph of a young woman I'd never met, holding a baby, taken in a hospital somewhere in Augusta. My son was 3 days old in that photograph. I sat with the folder on the kitchen table for a long time. Ruth, I said, I think it's time. I began writing that night. The letter took 4 attempts. The first was too angry. The second was too apologetic. The third wandered. The fourth said what needed to be said. Simply, directly, with love that didn't ask for anything back. My dear son, the letter began. There are things I should have told you long before today, and I'm sorry I waited this long. But I need you to know the truth about who you are, and about what your mother and I chose when we chose you. I sealed it inside an envelope. On the outside, in my handwriting, "Open this alone. It matters." Saturday morning arrived gray and warm, the way Savannah gets in late May. I put on my new shirt, my good dark jacket, pressed my slacks. Ruth had always said I cleaned up better than I gave myself credit for. I arrived at the Civic Center at 10:45. The invitation said 11. The lobby was already full. Families in their good clothes, flowers and balloons, faculty in robes moving through the crowd. I found my way to the auditorium entrance and handed my ticket to the usher. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, frowning at her seating chart. "This ticket is for the 11 o'clock ceremony." "That's right." She looked uncertain. "The doctoral hooding already began at 10. This is the undergraduate ceremony." I felt something go still inside me. My son was receiving his doctoral hood at 10 o'clock in the Harrington Hall Rotunda, she explained, looking genuinely apologetic. This was on the invitation sent to faculty and doctoral families. "Did you receive a different invitation?" I took my invitation from my jacket pocket and placed it next to the official program she was holding. The ceremony listed on mine was the undergraduate ceremony. Same building, different room, 2 hours apart. The usher's expression told me she understood exactly what she was looking at. I thanked her. I walked back through the lobby, through the glass doors, out into the gray Savannah morning. I found a bench in the small park across the street, and I sat down. At 10:15, through the tall windows of Harrington Hall, I could see movement. Robes. A processional. At some point, someone hooded my son. Professor Aldridge probably standing in my place. I sat on that bench with my hands on my knees and I let myself feel it fully. Not the anger, the grief. The specific grief of a parent who did everything he knew how to do and still ended up on the wrong side of a window. Then I reached into my jacket and took out the letter. The envelope was sealed. I checked it one more time. Set it back in my pocket. I walked back into the Civic Center. Not to Harrington Hall, but to the reception area where the doctoral celebration would move after the hooding. I knew the layout from the program. I had time. I found a seat at the edge of the room, near the gift table. Set my envelope down among the others. Went to get a cup of coffee from the refreshment station, and waited. They came in at 11:30. The doctoral graduates and their families, flushed with celebration, fresh from the hooding. My son walked in with Professor Aldridge's hand on his shoulder, laughing at something the older man had said. He was wearing his robes. He looked like himself, and like a stranger at the same time. He saw me across the room. His expression shifted relief, I think, mixed with something more guarded. "Dad." He came over. "I'm glad you made it." "Congratulations," I said. "I meant it." "I should have," he started. "It's all right," I said. I shook his hand, then pulled him in for a hug, brief and solid, the way we always had. "I brought you something." I pointed to the gift table. "It's there. The one with my handwriting on it. Will you open it tonight? When you're alone?" He looked at the table. "Sure, Dad." "Of course." Professor Aldridge appeared at his elbow. "Gerald Aldridge," he said, extending his hand to me. "Your son is exceptional. You must be very proud." I shook his hand. "I am. He's like the son I never had," Aldridge said, his hands settling on my son's shoulder again. "We've been talking about him coming to work with my research group full time. He's going to do remarkable things." I looked at my son's face when Aldridge said that. The way it opened up. The ease. The belonging. I said something polite. I don't remember what. Then I found a reason to drift away from the conversation, and I stood near the window with my coffee for a while, watching my son move through the room, shaking hands, laughing, comfortable in this world in a way he'd never quite been comfortable at my kitchen table. The dean of the department tapped a microphone. If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment, the room quieted. My son moved to the center of the room. A few of the other doctoral graduates stood with him, and I recognized this was the kind of moment people had been looking forward to, planned for, cameras raised. My son spoke briefly. He thanked the faculty. He thanked his cohort. He thanked Professor Aldridge with a warmth in his voice I hadn't heard him use in years. And then he said, "I want to acknowledge the person who really made this possible, who showed me what it looks like to truly invest in someone's future without being asked." He raised his glass toward Aldridge. "Gerald, You believed in my potential when others saw only limitations. I honestly don't know where I'd be without your support. You've been more of a father to me through this process than I could have hoped for." The applause was warm and immediate. I stood near the window with my coffee cup in my hand. A woman beside me, someone's grandmother, from the looks of it, glanced at me and then quickly away, the way people do when they've witnessed something they don't know how to address. I set my cup down on the windowsill. I buttoned my jacket. I walked to the exit at a pace that was deliberate and calm, and I pushed through the door into the hallway without looking back. In the parking lot, I sat in my truck. I didn't cry. I was past the age of crying over things I couldn't change. What I felt instead was a kind of clarity, the same thing you feel when you finally get an honest diagnosis after months of vague symptoms. It doesn't feel good, but it feels true. My son had made his choices long before today. Today was just the day he said them out loud. I drove home through the familiar streets of Savannah, past the freight depot where I used to punch in at 4:30 in the morning, past the church where we'd had Ruth's memorial, past the elementary school, where my son had once performed in a Thanksgiving play wearing cardboard pilgrim hat I'd helped him staple together the night before, laughing so hard at the glue on my fingers that he could barely hold still. At home, I changed out of my good jacket and hung it carefully. I put the kettle on. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my folder of financial papers and made some notes about what came next. The phone rang at 6:47 that evening. Dad. His voice was different. Tight. Dad, I found your envelope. I let a beat pass. What is this? His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He was trying to hold it together. What is this letter? Who are these people in these papers? I said gently. It's the truth, son. It's something I should have told you a long time ago. Your mother and I were going to tell you together, and then she got sick. And I... Stop. He was breathing hard. Are you saying you're not? I'm your father, I said. That hasn't changed for 1 second. I have been your father since the moment I held you in that hospital in Augusta when you were 3 days old. There is not a single day of the last 32 years I would take back. Not one. Silence. But your mother and I didn't bring you into this world biologically. We chose you. That's in the letter too, if you read all of it. More silence. I could hear him breathing. Why didn't you tell me? Why are you telling me now? His voice had gone from tight to something raw. At my graduation? Today? I think you know why today, I said quietly. Not unkindly, but clearly. He didn't answer that. You need some time with this, I said. Take the time. I'm not going anywhere. Are you? He stopped. Dad, are you at home? I am. I need to. I have to think. He sounded very young suddenly. Much younger than 32. I know you do. We hung up. I made tea from the same blend Ruth had loved, chamomile, with a little honey, and I sat in her chair and I looked at the oak tree out front, which was massive now, with roots that had long since outgrown the space we'd given it. My phone lit up 47 times that night. I answered 3 of them. Each time I said the same things. I love you. The letter says everything. Take the time you need. By the second day, his questions had shifted. He wasn't asking why I'd kept the secret anymore. He was asking different things. What do you know about and his voice would stumble there, not quite able to finish the sentence. I answered what I could. A young couple from Augusta. A car accident on I-20 when he was 8 months old. The caseworker who'd called us because we'd been on the waiting list for 3 years. Ruth crying so hard when she hung up the phone that I thought something had gone wrong before she managed to say, Walter, we have a son. By the 4th call, he was very quiet. I asked Professor Aldridge about the research position, he said finally. I told him I needed some time before I committed. That sounds right, I said. He said he understood. He paused. He doesn't really know anything about me, does he? It wasn't a question. He knows the parts you showed him, I said. Another long pause. The part where I'm exceptional. Yes, but you know the other parts. I've known all of it, I said. All 32 years. The parts that were hard, and the parts that weren't, and all the parts in between. That's what 41 years of getting up before sunrise and coming home at night is. That's what $18,000 saved $50 at a time looks like from the inside. He didn't say anything for a while. I heard him exhale. Dad, he said. His voice had something in it I hadn't heard in years. Something younger. I think I need to come home. My street was quiet in the late afternoon when his car pulled up. I watched from the porch. He got out in jeans and a plain shirt. No academic armor. He looked like himself. The self from before. All the polish. He walked up the porch steps and stopped in front of me. He had the letter in his hand. I'd written it on the last page. No matter what you do with this information, no matter what you feel about any of it, the 32 years are real. The bedtimes and the homework and the drives to baseball practice at 6 in the morning, and the day I told your mother you were the reason I never once resented a single early alarm clock. All of it is real. Biology didn't give you to us. Something better than biology did. And I have never, not once, wanted any other son. He stood on that porch and he held the letter. And he was crying in the way grown men cry when they've been holding it for too long. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Come inside," I said. "I'll put the kettle on." He nodded. We went in. The oak tree in the front yard held its branches wide in the evening light. Ruth's chair sat by the window. The kitchen table was the same one where I'd spread out bills and bank statements and taught him to do long division when he was 7, and sure he'd never understand it. Some things take a long time to understand, but the ones that matter, they're worth the wait.